There is a quiet moment in life that almost everyone experiences, though very few people recognize it while it is happening. It is the moment when someone you trusted reveals a side of themselves you had never imagined. At first, it arrives softly, almost politely, like a strange feeling in the back of your mind that something is slightly wrong. A sentence that felt colder than it should have. A decision that didn't quite align with the person you believed you knew. And in that moment, your mind begins its most desperate work, trying to protect you from the truth. You tell yourself there must be another explanation. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were misunderstood. Maybe you are overthinking it. Human beings are incredibly talented at building comforting stories around uncomfortable realities. We do it because the alternative is painful. The alternative means accepting that someone we trusted may not be the person we believed they were. But slowly, like fog lifting from a landscape, the truth begins to show its shape. And sometimes that shape is betrayal. The ancient Stoics were not naive about this. They lived in a world filled with political deception, shifting alliances, broken loyalties, and ruthless ambition. Men like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius observed human nature closely, not as philosophers hiding in libraries, but as individuals surrounded by power struggles and fragile relationships. They understood something that modern culture often tries to soften. Not every wound should be forgiven. Not every betrayal deserves another chance, because forgiveness, when given without wisdom, can quietly invite the same injury to happen again. Stoicism is often misunderstood as a philosophy of endless patience and passive acceptance, but that interpretation misses something crucial. The Stoics believed in emotional discipline, not emotional blindness. They believed in clarity, not self-deception. Their goal was not to protect the feelings of those who harmed you, but to protect the stability of your own mind. And sometimes protecting your peace requires remembering exactly who someone revealed themselves to be. There are betrayals that hurt but can eventually be understood. Miscommunications, mistakes, moments of weakness that people genuinely regret. Life is messy and no human being is perfect. But there are other betrayals that reveal something deeper, something structural in a person's character. When these occur, forgiving them blindly is not compassion. It is self-betrayal. One of the first betrayals that the Stoics quietly warned against forgiving is the betrayal of trust. Trust is a fragile and invisible contract between two people. It is not written, not spoken, yet it exists in every meaningful relationship. When you trust someone, you allow them to see parts of you that the rest of the world does not see. Your fears, your uncertainties, your private struggles, your ambitions that feel too fragile to share openly. In a sense, trust is a form of psychological vulnerability. You place a piece of your inner world into another person's care and assume they will treat it with respect. But occasionally, someone does something that reveals they never deserved that responsibility. They take the information you gave them in confidence and use it as leverage. They reveal something you told them in private. They weaponize your vulnerability in an argument or worse, in front of others. And in that moment, something very important becomes clear. This was not an accident. This was a choice. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about observing people honestly rather than through the comforting filters of hope or emotion. He believed that a person's character is revealed most clearly when they are given power over something that matters to you. Trust is exactly that kind of power. If someone uses your vulnerability as a weapon, they have revealed something about how they operate when the opportunity appears. They have demonstrated that your dignity is negotiable if it benefits them in the moment. And once someone has shown that willingness, pretending it never happened, does not make you compassionate, it makes you forgetful. The Stoics believed memory is not a burden, it is protection. They did not encourage people to obsess over betrayal or drown themselves in resentment, but they insisted on something equally important: clarity. When someone breaks your trust deliberately, the wise response is not dramatic, revenge, or emotional chaos. The wise response is quiet adjustment, a shift in distance, a recalibration of how much access that person has to your inner world. You do not necessarily need to punish them, but you must never forget what they revealed about themselves. There is another betrayal that cuts even deeper, and it often arrives during one of the most vulnerable chapters of a person's life. This is the betrayal of abandonment when you are struggling. There is an unspoken test hidden within every relationship. Most people never realize they are taking this test, and yet it quietly determines the strength of every bond they have. The test begins the moment your life becomes inconvenient, when your success fades for a while, when your confidence collapses, when your plans fail, when you are no longer the energetic, successful, optimistic version of yourself that people enjoy being around. Adversity acts like a light shining through a room, revealing who was standing there all along. Some people step closer during those moments. They listen, they support you, they remain steady, even when there is nothing glamorous about standing beside you. Others slowly disappear, offering vague excuses and polite distance. But occasionally, someone does something far worse than leaving. They turn against you, they mock your failure, they distance themselves publicly to protect their own image. They align themselves with people who criticize you. They behave as if your struggle is an embarrassment they must escape, and in that moment, something fundamental becomes clear. Their loyalty was conditional. Seneca once wrote that adversity introduces a person to themselves. Hardship strips away illusions and reveals who we really are. But adversity does something else as well. It reveals who the people around us truly are. Anyone can appear loyal during times of success and comfort. Loyalty is easy when standing beside you brings social benefits, status, or emotional ease. Real loyalty only appears when supporting you becomes inconvenient. When someone abandons you during hardship, they are not simply reacting to circumstances. They are revealing a hierarchy of values inside themselves. Comfort ranks above loyalty. Image ranks above integrity. And once that hierarchy is visible, the Stoics would argue that forgetting it is dangerous, not because you must become bitter, but because you must become aware. Human beings rarely betray you in completely new ways. They tend to repeat patterns that have already been revealed. The first betrayal is usually a glimpse of a deeper habit, and the final betrayal that the Stoics believed should never be forgiven lightly is perhaps the most corrosive of all. It is the betrayal of respect. Many people believe that love is the foundation of human relationships. It is a comforting idea, one that appears in poetry, movies, and romantic stories across every culture. But the Stoics saw relationships through a slightly colder lens. They understood that love can be emotional, unstable, and easily influenced by circumstances. Feelings rise and fall like weather patterns. Respect, however, operates differently. Respect determines how someone behaves toward you when emotions change. A person who respects you has internal boundaries that prevent them from humiliating you, degrading you, or repeatedly violating your dignity. Even during arguments, even during anger, there are lines they simply will not cross. But when respect disappears, those lines begin to fade. Disrespect often begins subtly. A dismissive comment here, a sarcastic remark there. Small moments where someone tests how much they can say or do without consequence. If these moments are ignored, something dangerous begins to happen. They learn. Human beings adapt quickly to the permissions they are given. Every time disrespect is tolerated, it teaches the other person that the boundary is weaker than it appeared. Slowly, almost invisibly, the dynamic shifts. The relationship begins to tilt in their favor. Your patience becomes their opportunity. Your forgiveness becomes their permission, and eventually the pattern becomes clear. The Stoics believed that self-respect is one of the most important internal structures a person can maintain. Not in the loud, prideful sense that demands admiration from others, but in the quiet sense that refuses to participate in relationships that erode your dignity. When someone repeatedly betrays your respect, forgiving them endlessly does not demonstrate strength. It demonstrates tolerance for your own diminishment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that other people's behavior cannot damage your character unless you allow it to influence your choices. You cannot control whether someone behaves dishonorably, but you can control how much space they are allowed to occupy in your life. And this is where Stoic philosophy becomes deeply uncomfortable for many people, because the Stoics were not interested in preserving relationships at all costs. They were interested in preserving clarity. Sometimes the wisest response to betrayal is not confrontation. It is not revenge. It is not even forgiveness. It is quiet recognition, a calm acceptance of what someone has revealed about themselves. And once that recognition appears, something inside you changes. You begin to see your relationships through a sharper lens. You notice patterns that once went unnoticed. You recognize the difference between words and behavior. You become more selective, not colder, not cruel, simply more aware. Because the deepest lesson Stoicism offers is not about other people at all. It is about protecting the stability of your own mind. Every betrayal places you at a crossroads. One path leads toward resentment, endless rumination, and emotional chaos. The other path leads toward clarity, memory, and controlled distance. The Stoics chose the second path. They did not waste years of their lives obsessing over those who betrayed them. They did not attempt to control the character of others. Instead, they refined their own judgment. They learned to recognize dangerous patterns early. They learned to withdraw their trust carefully. And most importantly, they learned to accept a difficult truth about human nature. Some people are not meant to remain in your life once they reveal who they truly are. Not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. And perhaps the most painful realization of all is that the greatest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from people who once stood close enough to see the most fragile parts of your life. But sometimes, distance is not an act of anger. Sometimes distance is the quiet architecture of self-respect. There is a strange silence that follows betrayal. Not the loud, dramatic kind of silence that people imagine in stories, but a quieter one that settles slowly into your thoughts. It appears during ordinary moments, when you are walking alone, when you are driving somewhere familiar, when your mind drifts back to the memory without warning. And in that silence, something uncomfortable begins to surface. You begin to realize that the betrayal did not begin on the day it happened. It began long before. The Stoics believed that human behavior rarely changes suddenly. Instead, it reveals itself in patterns, in small signals scattered throughout time. But most people ignore those signals because they prefer harmony over confrontation, hope over suspicion, and comfort over clarity. So when the betrayal finally arrives, it feels shocking, even though the evidence may have been quietly accumulating for months or years. This is why Stoic philosophy places such enormous importance on awareness, not paranoia, not cynicism, but observation. The ability to look at people as they are rather than as you wish them to be. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that every person acts according to their nature. Some people value loyalty, dignity, and honesty. Others value advantage, convenience, and control. And once you begin paying attention, these values reveal themselves in subtle ways. In the way someone speaks about others when they are not present. In the way they react when someone else succeeds. In the way they handle power when they briefly possess it. Betrayal is rarely the first sign of someone's character. It is simply the moment when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. But the Stoics also understood something else that modern thinking often misunderstands about betrayal. The goal is not to become hardened or emotionally closed. The goal is to become discerning. There is a difference. A hardened person stops trusting anyone. They build walls around themselves so thick that no relationship can ever reach them again. Their fear becomes a prison they carry everywhere. But a discerning person learns something more sophisticated. They learn to trust slowly. They learn to observe quietly. They learn to notice the difference between words and behavior, and most importantly, they learn to protect their inner world without becoming bitter, because bitterness is its own form of captivity. Seneca warned about this danger repeatedly. He believed resentment was like drinking poison while waiting for someone else to suffer. The longer you carry hatred towards someone who betrayed you, the more space they occupy inside your mind. The Stoic response is far more strategic. You release the emotional weight of the betrayal, but you keep the lesson. You stop replaying the event with anger, yet you remember what it revealed about the person involved. Their access to your life changes, sometimes permanently, and from the outside it can look almost effortless. There is no dramatic argument, no announcement, no emotional spectacle, just a quiet shift. Less access, less vulnerability, less presence, and eventually, less importance. This quiet withdrawal is one of the most powerful forms of self-protection that Stoic philosophy teaches, because when someone betrays you, they are often expecting a predictable response. They expect rage, confrontation, pleading, or emotional chaos. These reactions give them something: attention, validation, proof that they still occupy space in your emotional world, but calm distance denies them all of it. The Stoics understood that attention is a form of power. When you continue reacting emotionally to someone who betrayed you, you are still allowing them to influence your mental state. But when you step back with clarity, something interesting happens. Their influence disappears. They become simply another person in the world, someone whose character has been observed and quietly filed away in your understanding of human nature. And the deeper lesson slowly begins to unfold, because betrayal, painful as it is, has an unusual ability to sharpen perception. Before betrayal, many people move through life trusting easily, sometimes blindly. They assume others share the same values they hold themselves. They believe loyalty is universal, honesty is common, and respect is natural. But after betrayal, the illusion fades. You begin to see the subtle complexity of human behavior. You notice the difference between people who speak about loyalty and those who practice it. You notice the difference between people who admire strength and those who quietly resent it. You notice the difference between people who celebrate your success and those who grow strangely distant when you begin to rise. This awareness is not pessimism, it is maturity. Marcus Aurelius ruled one of the most powerful empires in history, yet he constantly reminded himself that people would lie, manipulate, deceive, and act selfishly. He did not write these observations with bitterness. He wrote them as preparation. He believed that understanding human nature in advance prevents emotional shock when reality unfolds exactly as it often does. And perhaps this is the deepest Stoic insight hidden within betrayal. The real danger is not that someone betrayed you. The real danger is that you allow the betrayal to transform you into someone you were never meant to become. And some people become paranoid, suspicious of every relationship. Others become cynical, assuming that loyalty and integrity are illusions. But the Stoic path avoids both extremes. It teaches you to remain open, but not blind, to remain kind, but not naive, to remain calm, but not forgetful. And over time, something interesting happens to people who adopt this mindset. Their social world becomes smaller, but stronger. The careless connections disappear. The superficial relationships slowly fade away. The individuals who only appeared during moments of convenience drift elsewhere. And what remains are the rare people whose character has been tested and revealed through time. People who did not disappear when things became difficult. People who did not exploit your vulnerability. People who did not treat your dignity as negotiable. These individuals are rare, but they exist. And Stoic philosophy teaches that a small circle of trustworthy people is infinitely more valuable than a wide network of uncertain ones, because peace does not come from having many people around you. Peace comes from knowing exactly who stands beside you and who does not. In the end, the Stoics never taught people to seek betrayal or to welcome it, but they did believe that betrayal contains a strange form of clarity. It removes illusions. It reveals character. It teaches discernment. And perhaps most importantly, it forces you to confront a difficult but liberating truth. You cannot control who someone chooses to become. You cannot force loyalty where it does not exist. You cannot persuade someone to respect you if their nature does not allow it. But you can control something far more powerful. You can control who continues to have access to your life. And sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is not loudly cutting someone off. It is quietly stepping away once you understand exactly who they are. Because life becomes remarkably peaceful when the people who betrayed your trust, abandoned your struggle, or repeatedly disrespected your dignity no longer occupy the center of your world, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of understanding.